Good afternoon. I want to thank you for joining us this afternoon. We've designed this presentation on the assumption that all of you are perhaps less familiar with how the California Commission was created and what we had to do in order to become functional as a commission. I'm going to run through the slides fairly quickly because we want to really leave as much time as we can for questions, since I think that's a more effective way for you to get the answers that are important to you. So just to repeat, of course, that we are here under the auspices of a Harvard Kennedy School of Government ASH grant, which has been instrumental in allowing us to travel around the country and speak to all the states that, as many of the states as we can, and we still have some more pending that are engaged now in reform, and even some that have already passed the reform. We visited those states as well. So apparently we may have little technical glitches with our slides, but I'm going to do my best. I'm just going to stand really still and barely touch the buttons so the slides will advance without any disasters at all. Our names again are up there just in case you've forgotten who we are. Does your state need redistricting reform? Well, we already know that, so we can move on to what is your state's path to reform. We know that too. So, we know we're fortunate in California that we had the initiative. You have a lot of persuading to do. In California, it took about 7 years to get Prop 11 on the ballot. And that's the initiative that actually created the commission. So we were not involved directly in that process. We all voted for the initiative, but we were not involved in the creation. So really, this presentation is drawing on what the good people of Common Cause, League of Women Voters, Governor Schwarzenegger, and others have done to get the initiative on the ballot. The really important issues, and this I think applies even when you're going out now and talking to your fellow citizens about how to get involved, is that you need a lot of organizers. You're going to need some experts. You need people with open minds, and you have to be very persistent. As I said, 7 years to get Prop 11 on the ballot. So I know you've been at this for a while, and it seems like I know you're impatient for something to happen, but we feel very confident change will come. The momentum is there across the country. It will come. So you have to find your message. I think that's been done. What's on the voters' minds? Well, everybody wants something other than what we have, which is legislators choosing us instead of us choosing our legislators. You have to find a lot of money, of course, and you have to have some good allies. We were very lucky, and Gil will speak to this. Also, if you have questions about the economic effects of unjamming, if that's a word, the legislative gridlock. We had a lot of business interests involved. We were just looking it up too on the computer, and some of the different people that we had sort of forgotten were involved from the very beginning. But these would be pretty much the top allies and supporters. I was speaking to some people earlier about how this group, Fair Districts, might find ways to reach out more to communities of color to get people involved. And that's essential. That's how you're going to get a broad representation and a diverse representation on the commission. In California, you can't walk down the street without encountering, 10 different languages just within the space of half an hour. So, we're very accustomed to really broad diversity. Okay. So it looks like when you have all those things in place, you're ready to go. But you need to make sure you have clearly defined goals. Ours was to undo things like the old map and come up with something that was more representative of the region that fairly encompassed the interests of the people. And a lot of the same cities are in those two maps. So that's just one example of what we were able to accomplish. Here's a picture of our full commission. And as you can see, let me see if I can find this. The youngest person on the commission is Connie Malloy. At the time, she had about a 1 or 2 year old, has since had another one, and those kids are now in elementary school. Michelle here had 4 children under 10. This is Vince Baraba, who happened just by luck to have been a U.S. Census Bureau director under 2 administrations. So that was completely random that we were able to get him. But you can see just by looking across across the spectrum, we encompass pretty much, the major identities of California voters, and the 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats, 4 independents. Operations, we had to create the whole thing. We had nothing to start with, being the first commission, so the infrastructure was entirely up to us. The next commission, who will be entirely different, by the way. None of us will be on the next commission. It changes hands entirely. So these are all the things that we had to hire. We had to hire people with an eye to all of the California requirements. Again, totally transparent process. All of our hiring decisions were made in the public eye. All the discussion of the people who submitted RFPs was in the public eye. The public participation component, we've said already, is we just consider that the essential of making this thing work. Hearing the voters at 34 public hearings across the state, more than 20,000 emails that came into us. So that's can be a challenging thing, but luckily for you, being a little more compact state, when you get to the point of trying to engage voters, again, you just want to reach out as broadly as you can to organizations that will allow you to draw in the point of view of diverse communities. Some of the intangibles that I think you'll find when you have a commission is that there should be a great deal of camaraderie, and I'm sorry it's misspelled, trust, respect among the commissioners, trust in each other, so that then you can create that public trust that is the essence of the independent redistricting. Maybe litigation, maybe not. I think it's just one of those risks that may be unavoidable. We were sued several times, prevailed every time in the California Supreme Court. Our districts also passed Department of Justice muster regarding Voting Rights Act requirements. So what we would like to do, is just open it up now to questions that you might have about the process, how 14 strangers came together and worked out consensus on the maps, maybe some of the challenges people faced in serving on the commission, and what some of our big takeaways are. And so Andre and Gil are going to join in answering questions, and maybe I'll just try to moderate and then let them answer some of the questions. So, yes, ma'am.
Where did you meet? Frequently did you meet? Did you move around the state?
Gil? You guys are answering, come on.
So the question is, how many times we met, and where did we meet, and how did the mechanics of this? Yeah, okay. So when we first got together, we realized, oh my God, this is a big state with a lot of people in it. How are we going to do this? As an architect, I was the first one to propose, well, here's 9 months, and we got to make some key decisions by these certain dates. If we don't, we're screwed. So that's the first thing we did. We mapped out a schedule on how we're going to meet the public, get that data back, make decisions, get back to the community, get their feedback, and then make a final determination. So in a broad scope, that's what we did. We decided in order to do that, we're going to do it in 2 cycles. The first cycle, we're going to act dumb. We don't know anything about California. We got the census data, which tells us how California's population grew over the last 10 years and what the demographics are. So in this first cycle, we went out to all of the areas in California, starting from the very north, went all the way down to the south. And each of these meetings, we said nothing. We shared the criteria, the ranking file, and whoever showed up, we said, we want you to give us some idea of where you think your lines should be that encapsulates your communities of interest, your business interests, whatever you think defines your community. Tell us. We're not going to make any judgment. We're just going to collect that. And then we're going to look at it and draw some preliminary maps from that. So that was the first cycle. We started from the top, then went all the way down to the south. And all we did was take public testimony. And as we began that process, the lines and the attendance and the participation got bigger and bigger and bigger, because all of this was done very transparently, live stream to the general public. So anybody who wanted to see it, if they came home after 5 o'clock work and wanted to see what we did and who talked, they could flip on the TV and there it was. So we did that in the first cycle. So some 34 public hearings, right? Total. That's the first cycle. We got together after that first cycle, met at a college which had live streamed all of our discussions, and we literally went over those comments, those testimonies, those napkin drawings, those formal drawings that people gave to us. And we started drawing lines. And we knew we were not going to do the perfect set of plans at that time. But we did the best we can with talking to those that had come forward during that first cycle and do those maps. We drew those lines. So as we were drawing those lines, because it's live stream, we got a deluge of criticism from the public saying, no, that's not what we wanted. This is what we wanted. So, and we kind of knew that would happen in that first cycle. You can't draw the first perfect map, but we wanted the communities to respond to that rough draft. So we then took all that criticism, redrew the lines again as best we could based on the feedback from all these communities. And then we with our technical consultants, our mappers, our legal, voting rights attorneys, and our team that we had assembled, they helped us refine those districts, state assembly, Senate, and congressional districts. And we put together the second set of maps that we felt best represented what the communities were telling us. Then we started all over again. Second cycle, we took those maps, started from Northern California, and again worked our way down, getting public testimony on that second round of maps. And as we were doing that again, ProPublica was giving us feedback constantly. So it was a continuous process of getting public input as we drew these maps. Does that help?
In the back.
And I wanted to address that question, but
Let's try to get as many questions as we can.
One of the criticisms that has gotten some publicity and that I've heard from one of our legislators is that there was attempts, real partisan attempts, to influence the commissioners. And that's, I think you know what I'm referring to.
Yes, I know, sure.
So if you could explain what I'm referring to and how do you keep that from happening? Because our legislators are saying, there are going to be groups that are going to influence this behind closed doors, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I'm going to let Jeanne talk about how we resolve that issue.
I think the source of a lot of that is the ProPublica article, which alleged that there were Democratic operatives who snuck in testimony, and those poor dumb commissioners didn't know what was going on. And nothing could be further from the truth. Actually, that article has several things that I would characterize as careless writing about the facts, including how it was done and what the impact was. The commission was fully aware, and a lot of this happened in Los Angeles in particular, but fully aware of the consistency, repetitious testimony that we were getting. It was clear that there was something orchestrated, not just in that case, but in a number of areas around the state where we would get, hundreds of emails that started out. I live in, I don't want to name anybody, but I live in, and we don't want those people in our district. We got hundreds of people on an issue just like that. So the thing is, our commissioners, I think, are a pretty sophisticated group of people, pretty intelligent. We've had a lot of experience. I was telling people over lunch, most of us are parents, and I think if there are people good at spotting somebody who's trying to pull something over on you, it's people who've had experience with kids. And even though there are people who felt that they could have that influence, ultimately, because of the process that Gil just described, there was so much of a balancing of what went on, so much of an ongoing change in the maps based on what we were hearing and whether we were complying with the Voting Rights Act and so on, that just didn't happen. I guess the simplest way is to say it didn't happen. I think that sometimes legislators, because they fundamentally believe that regular people, even though they are regular people, cannot do this job, I think that's a very convenient argument to latch onto. Yes. Yes, ma'am.
I'm curious as to the legislative leaders, what role they played, if any, and did the money come from the legislature to fund this?
The legislators had one touch in the entire process of the California Commission, and that was during the selection of commissioners. They, at the point where there were 60 applicants in the pool, they could strike 24. So both houses, leaders of both houses had a certain number of strikes. They had to do it in a way that it left the pools equally intact. So they had that strike. We had no communication with them about it. Nobody did, so it was just like a peremptory strike in a jury. And that was the only touch. We were forbidden to have any contact with legislators. Nothing we did could be discussed or done outside of a noticed public meeting. Yes?
I asked this question to Gil, so this is really the other.
Oh.
Any legislators, nevertheless, trying to reach out to you, trying to lobby you, what did you tell them, and did they actually get in line to a public?
I never had anybody talk to me personally until afterwards when my state senator complained that he had to buy a new house so he could run in the new district. But we did have, there's one prominent example that I never forget. Maxine Waters came to testify when we were in Sacramento, and we learned early on that we could not give people much time because there were so many people that wanted to be heard. So we had pretty much set a time, like 2 minutes. You can give your testimony in 2 minutes. You can submit 2,000 pages, but you can only talk for 2 minutes. And I just remember being so kind of stunned when the clock went off and Maxine Waters had to stop talking. So it was an equal opportunity microphone, and it didn't matter who you were. That was all you got. And I think, is that the only legislator that I recall coming and actually addressing us? Yeah, maybe a state rep, but they knew to avoid us.
And in general, the legislators, they took a complete hands-off approach. They didn't want to have anything to do with us, you know, to give the impression that they were somehow infiltrating or corrupting our process. They were like, oh no, here come these people, Jody, and for example, Jody and Connie, two of our commissioners, went to their office to see if they could assist us in procuring, cutting through the red tape with procurement items. Like, we didn't have pencils, desks, chairs. And the state, much like I'm sure it's similar here in Pennsylvania, there's a long procurement process where it takes 9 months to get whatever, a ream of paper or whatever it might be. We didn't have the luxury of that, so we had to gingerly tiptoe and ask for money and to speed up the procurement process, to cut through the red tape with the RFPs, to get staff in place. So no, they didn't want to deal with us very much at all. And sure.
For a second.
Yeah.
We had a $3 million budget for the redistricting, and we did come in within that budget, the whole process of that. And then we had to go back to the legislature to get additional funding for litigation costs. So our total costs in the end were about $10 million. It was the Republicans primarily who sued us. And the next commission, I think, is going to have a little bit larger budget to start with, just, you know, in recognition of everything is more expensive. But we were very frugal with the taxpayers' money. We really are volunteers. We did get a per diem, and we did get our expenses covered. But I can tell you, and I think these guys could say the same thing, there's a lot of money that came out of our pockets, and a lot of time we weren't being, you know, compensated. Not that we're complaining about that, but we're, you know, it's just a fact that it would take, I don't know how many millions, you know, to be able to really do that.
Yes. And I just wanted to add that we had to be very mindful in the public input process of individuals who were giving testimony, who may have given testimony as a constituent, a resident of someone's district, that may have wanted to advocate sort of subtly on behalf of their elected official, especially in a competitive district. So we had to understand to a certain extent what the generally what the political environment was, but we were not involved with any incumbencies or any issues that would reflect in favor of any elected official in any area at all. So we were mindful of subtle influences when we saw them. We sort of raised the flag. We're like, that doesn't look right. So let's keep that public comment in mind.
You have a question?
So let me add, I think there's a piece to that last question that I want to fill in. So I can't speak for other members, but as a Republican, I was approached by congressional members asking to meet with them, and I indicated to them that under the First Voters Act, it was not permissible. So I quickly put a stop to that. I did get anonymous letters saying that I should consider this, party letters, but again, you know, I had to push it aside. So I'm sure to some degree you're going to have to face the realities of politics in Pennsylvania as well. But going back to the larger question on the finances, what the Voters First Act did was set up a fourth branch of government in California, and that's us. So we had to come up with our own budget, submit it to the legislature, and get it approved by the governor and the legislature. And that's the routine we had to do. But the buck stopped with us. We made those decisions, and no one challenged us because the law provided us with that final decision. The only folks that we were responsible to were the citizens of California.
We have about 10 minutes, so we'll try to be more brief so we can get all your questions in. You had a question right here? Yeah. Okay, great. Let me just go from here and I'll go back.
Okay, so I was wondering wondering, did you hire somebody to draw the maps, or did you folks, I mean, probably the final thing you did, but did you have a map maker that you subcontracted to or something?
Yes, we did. We had professional mappers who followed the directions given to them by the commission. They could not go off and do anything on their own. They would go off in the evening and sometimes all night, I think they worked, in order to come back in the morning having incorporated all the directions that they were given. Yes. I just have to say, one of the emails that we received told us that a blind monkey with a crayon could have done a better job. Yes, ma'am.
I'm wondering about any resistance you had from the legislature to fund you.
Yes, plenty. Not so much, during the process, but certainly afterwards when, we serve a 10-year term. So I think even we have asked the question a number of times, what do we do now? Because we finished the maps, we finished defending them, and everything's fine, and now what do we do? So we had a few years where we just needed money to keep an office open, which wasn't really necessarily a physical office, but just, keep something open so we could continue to communicate with the public as necessary. There could have been more lawsuits, maintain our website so that all of our information would remain available to the public. Yes.
My question was, because the underlying theme, in my opinion, from what you guys were talking about, is a trust issue, and as far as the trust issue that goes into either politicians picking the commission or whoever the commission is, trusting them to have a fair and independent redistricting or districting of the maps. And so my question is, wouldn't it be possible to just have a completely independent, not a selection of this number of Republicans, this number of Democrats and independents, and have them do the redistricting, but really a third party? Like I was just thinking in Pennsylvania, you have the U.S. Census information that gets sent down to, I believe, Penn State, and they do whatever, handle the stats as far as that information. Couldn't like a third party, like Penn State University, actually, once they get that census information, put
I'll
it
start
in the
it and you
computer
guys
system,
jump in.
divide the, 12.5 million population plus that's in Pennsylvania into the 203 districts, then have some map people come in, and based on locality, like county, first start with county, try to keep counties together rather than, and then maybe school districts, something to keep a specific area together. And so I guess it's called algorithm. And so I didn't even know if there was another state that had algorithm, did the redistricting, used algorithms to redistrict, that it's, just generated based on the numbers and the actual area, rather without this,
Right.
carving up neighborhoods. You know what I mean? Just keeping it like the counties within the same region, within the same county. That
Right. I think that, I know they're going to want to weigh in on this, so let me just kind of introduce the idea that what we considered a crucial component of our process was engaging the public and allowing citizens to talk to us about, also in California, we were talking about 20 years, undoing 20 years of gerrymandering in the most recent redistricting, and the demographics had changed quite a bit. So a robot, so to speak, doing the process really is not going to know what's important to the people and create that sense of transparency and trust. And I know they want to weigh in on it too.
Yeah, there's been a lot of overtures that the redistricting process should be as objective as possible, using only data that could scientifically, magically draw these lines that all of you in here will be so happy? Do you trust a machine to make decisions in your life?
I'm a numbers person. And so I'm thinking with the U.S. Census, they know, Erie County, as far as Pennsylvania, Erie County, this is what your population is. Philadelphia, this is what your population is. And so if they know, here's, 10 million here and there's 2 million here, you can't really argue with the numbers. Yeah, but that's my thinking.
Yep. Yep.
Numbers are numbers.
Yep.
Versus, easier to explain too.
So to a certain extent, that kind of tool is helpful. But beyond that, you have to trust what the people's going to define as, what's going to make them happy in that district. And no amount of data can do that. But you do need that baseline. Those models could be very helpful as baseline starting points. But in the end, if we totally depended on mathematical models, I can tell you right now, somebody, either Republicans or Democrats, are not going to be happy. There'll be lawsuits flying all over the place in court. Can you imagine a bunch of nerds telling the judges how this thing works?
And I want to. In the interest of time, I'm going to be very brief. I appreciate your question, but I know we have other questions. I want to say, with regard to a third-party institution like a university or whatever, keep in mind that we were carefully scrutinized. There were 36,000 applicants initially. That was whittled down to about 5,000 or so. From that number, it was eventually reduced, I don't have time to go through each and every stage of it, to 120. And from that stage, ultimately, the 14 of us were selected. That's the short version. We were carefully scrutinized with conflicts of interest questions, with background checks, with it was a very specific series of criteria we had to adhere to be among those 14. So I don't think anyone could do a better job than our Bureau of State Audits did in selecting the final groupings that we have. Because the other way, it's intrinsically biased by just having some institution or so out there. Yeah. And secondly, very quickly, I see the lady has a question here too, and I want to hear her question. But with regards to algorithms and computer modeling, that's a very good question. People don't live in boxes and squares. People live in settlement patterns. By using a computer, I don't think you can program the variables into a machine to really take on the nuances, especially after we've gone to all these public input hearings and so on, to look at school districts, watersheds, historical settlement patterns, transportation corridors, some of these intangible type of, not quantitative measurements, but qualitative measurements that we receive based on our knowledge of the area, based on our extensive discussions about what we heard and digested after these meetings, and how we ultimately reflected upon that input and drew the maps that we ultimately came up with. So there's no machine. We are the machines. we're the thinking processors of this information.
Okay, ma'am, in the back,
Do you base the district on that?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. The lady behind you has had her hand up for a while, so if I may take your question, because we only have about 2 minutes, I think, left. No, that was a great answer.
One quick comment and one question. I spent 12 years trying to get the Pennsylvania legislature to adopt a nonpartisan redistricting process based on islands, which is done by the Legislative Services Bureau. It seems to work fine in Iowa, but over the last 40 years, it's clear that people have lost so much confidence in government impartiality that I think that the citizen outreach and the interaction did you work out that initial budget?
Well, the money was allocated to us. The legislature, they did it based on, yeah, they allocated it based on what they thought redistricting had cost them to do. So that's how they came up with $3 million.
And then you had to go back and ask for another $7 million.
Yeah, mainly for the litigation defense, yeah. Sir, now you had the gentleman in front of you had a question. Sir?
That's okay.
Yeah? Okay, thank you. Did I see somebody in the back? Because I just want to make,
Just to clarify, I'm one of those data nerds who works on maps and things. And so, first of all the things that you listed are things that actually can be quantifiable. Like, we could build a map based off of
Yes,
those as
okay.
variable inputs. I don't think we should just use numbers because there will always be something that a model misses, but we don't have to denigrate, one,
yes.
using those numbers. Two, the idea that people like us who have expertise in how we use those numbers to make sure a map is fair or not, can speak to the judiciary and can explain that expertise in common language, and should and can, so that whether it's used to build the map or used to test if the map is fair, there's a place for that. It's not alone. It's in conjunction with people.
Yeah, and you know, we want to be clear. We feel our California model worked at the time with the tools we had available to us and the intent of that commission, but we also recognize that 10 years have passed, and we expect that technology will continue to be, or that sort of thing, and I apologize if our use of the term nerd, we don't want to offend you because we have our own nerds. And one of whom, you know, informed me that there was such a thing as Siri the first night we were on the commission. So I just want to make sure we have a chance to get in any other questions because I know we're going to have to wrap up. Yes, ma'am.
Well, so, what are the benefits that we can go back and say to our legislature? California says, if I'm right, that, the budget wasn't balanced before this, but it's been balanced since then, am I right?
Yes.
Okay, that people have been able to work better in the legislature. It's eliminated gridlock. But, so I want to hear what other things you can say that we can go back and say, these are the real positive benefits of having this. Money
Well,
being one.
yeah, I think, you know, Gil has spoken to well, let me say this first. You know, we did not save the world from disaster and, you know, completely shift the future of California. But I think what we did, what the benefit is that we increase the trust that voters have. You want as many voters as possible participating, and that's what democracy should be, is to encourage people that they have a reason to participate. We did, without gridlock, achieve some successes in other very tangible ways that have been good for our state. The economy has improved. We've been able to get legislation passed, and Gil's, you know, a little more on top of this point by point, but we've been able to do that in areas like, you know, about the environment, about climate change, about jobs and so on. So there are those benefits, but I guess what I think legislators sometimes miss is that this is not a forever, should not be a forever thing for them. The advantage is that you're bringing in your whole state, which brings in all the talent, all the insight, all the experience that your state needs to move forward. I don't know, does that help or? Okay. I want to thank you all very much. I think we're at time. And I just want to thank you all for joining us and for hosting us here in Pennsylvania. This is my second trip to Pennsylvania. Second, is it my third? Oh, his third. Okay. Yeah, we lose track. Huh?
And I'm from Baltimore, right down the street, and I've lived and worked in Pennsylvania, so it's good being back to my home away from home. Berks County, Lancaster County, and Westmoreland County, I resided there. Good being back home.
Thank you.